Welcome to Candid Catholic Convos, a program brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg. Our mission is to humanize the Church and help you to grow in your faith, love, and understanding. I'm your host, Rachel Trochet, a cradle Catholic who's only human and struggled with faith on more than one occasion. Each week, you'll hear engaging, down-to-earth interviews and actionable strategies you can implement into your life with ease to help you grow closer to God. If you're ready to open your heart and step fully into the person God created you to be, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Candid Catholic Convos. It's February, and love is in the air. Or is that disinfectant? I can never tell anymore because everyone in my house is currently sick. But what I can tell you is Valentine's Day is right around the corner. In our house, we probably won't be exchanging gifts or chocolate this year. I mean, it'll be a miracle if we don't exchange viruses. But that doesn't mean that we won't do something to honor our relationships. It might just look different. When we were still newly married, I'm talking pre-kids, married less than 5 years, newly married, my husband spent Valentine's Day in basic training for the Army. One was definitely the loneliest number for me that year. But I decided instead of wallowing, I was going to take myself out on a date. I went out and got lunch by myself. I got my nails done. I got a massage, bought myself some flowers. And then I came home and wrote my husband a sappy love letter. And it was great. Now that I'm a more seasoned military spouse and definitely a busy mom, I'm always looking for ways to improve my relationship with my husband or my kids or my friends. And then it dawned on me. When's the last time I worked on my relationship with God? Sure, I say my prayers and I go to church, but when was the last time I actually put any effort into that relationship? In one of our previous episodes, Erin McCulcup put it so eloquently. God is not a drive-through. We can't just pay for blessings with 3 Hail Marys and an Our Father. Could you imagine if our in-person relationships were like that? They wouldn't really be very fruitful, would they? More like acquaintances, right? And God doesn't want to be acquaintances with us. He wants all of us. So how do we deepen our relationship with God during this season of love? I'm excited to welcome back Chris Wood, youth minister and spiritual director for the diocese, to give us some tangible tips on creating an intimate relationship with God. Chris, welcome back to Candid Catholic Convos. I love having you on our program because you're so easy to talk to and you have such this wealth of knowledge and I really appreciate you stopping by.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be back, even in this remote format, but it's really good. I'm excited about this episode. Like I said, I think I say that every time, but the topics are always very good. And when you sent me this one, I'm immediately excited to do this. So we're happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey, so like you mentioned, we talk about this pretty much every time we have you on the program. We talk about this intimacy with God. And I thought, what a unique take on a Valentine's Day episode. So let's talk about that. What do we mean when we say creating this intimacy with God?
Well, it's not that hard to explain. We just have to take the human distortion of the word intimacy out of it. You know, when we say intimacy, a lot of us think sexual intimacy, and that's fine because that's real and that exists. And it's a beautiful part of a married vocation. But that's not supposed to be the focus or the only definition of intimacy. Intimacy is this closeness, the most close that we can be. And again, you have to talk about sex more, but like the act of sexual intimacy in a marriage actually does define intimacy very well, in that it is the closest two human beings can come to each other. And that's why it's such a beautiful and intimate moment between a husband and a wife, is this coming together and two people literally becoming one, connecting in this deeply intimate way. And that also, in a way, describes very beautifully what intimacy with God can be like. But we have to take the sexual, that part of it out of it, the sexual pleasurable part, all of that out, and just understand intimacy in the same way in that it is intimacy with God is coming as close to God as we can, as possible, at least while we're on this earth as people, living this life with original sin and all those things that get in the way. But like I said, intimacy with God can be very easily understood if we just understand the basics of what intimacy is, just this super closeness, this union of two people. And we can have intimacy in lots of relationships. It's not just marriage. We have intimacy with very close friends. You can have an this is easier for girls to understand a lot of time than guys, I think, just because of how girls can get close in a way that guys don't always in the same way, even though they kind of do, they just don't think of it that way. But people listening, if you have like that super close friend, you could share everything with that person that's like, maybe it's a sibling, some people have a sister or brother they're very close with, or, I have a very good friend, same thing, where you just can have this union of sharing together and just being your full self, and they're not going to judge you and you could talk to them about anything. That's an intimate relationship. Actually, I wanted to quote, there's a really funny movie. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Love Guru. It's a Mike Myers movie, the guy who did Austin Powers and stuff, like Wayne's World.
I think I've seen the Austin Powers movies, but I don't think I've ever seen The Love Guru, but I've heard it.
The Love Guru, in that movie, he's playing like a Hindu type new agey guru guy. He's like in competition with Deepak Chopra, who's like a real guru guy you may have heard of. So he's playing this character that's like this semi-famous love guru, right? And he does these conferences that they do. It's just playing on that stereotype. It's a really funny movie. And a lot of these guys have these like cheesy quotes that they say that are like, oh, like moments of wow. And so he's playing that stereotype. And one of the things that he says is he's talking about intimacy. And this popped in my head when you reached out to me with this podcast. This exact thing popped into my head because it's meant to be a joke, but it says it so beautifully. In the movie, one of his cheesy quote things is he's talking about intimacy. And if I remember right, like the word is on like this board behind him. It says intimacy. Into me, I see. Into you, I see. And like it's this like super jokey moment in the movie because it's kind of corny because he's breaking it down from into me, I see to into you, I see. But it actually defines intimacy so beautifully because that is the intimacy of I'm no longer focused on myself. I'm fully focused on the other person. The you, into you, I see. The intimacy is me looking into you and you looking into me. And again, we can relate that very well into the kind of intimacy we're always accustomed to. Like I said, the sexual union between a husband and a wife. It's very intimate. You're looking into that person. They're looking into you. But that's not, like I said, the only time. And we can understand that same thing and that definition from the Love Guru movie so beautifully when it comes to God, of that intimacy with God is you looking directly at God and him looking directly into you, looking into each other in such a beautiful way. So that's why I said, like, when you sent me that movie quote popped right into my head. So into you, I see. So, but that defines it so beautifully. So, and another example people may notice related to friendship that I thought of is people who are a fan of The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Because most people know that J.R.R. Tolkien was a very devout Catholic, and there's those books and even the movies are full of Catholic undertones. And one of the things that he highlighted so strongly was the concept of brotherly love. Because again, he wrote those in the wake of World War I and World War II, and there was a lot of intimacy with soldiers in combat. We've seen movies where like Band of Brothers type things where those people come together, and that's intimacy as well. And one of the best images that we see of intimacy between friends is the relationship between Frodo and Sam in The Lord of the Rings. And we see that come into real true fruition at the end when Sam has that part in the last movie or the last book where he says, well, I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. And like his deep love for Frodo and Frodo's love for him is like a big theme for this that carries them through, because without Sam, they wouldn't have been successful. And that intimacy and that dedication and that love that he had for Frodo and that Frodo had for him together. And again, that wasn't a sensual love. That was brotherly love. That was an intimacy between very close friends that through this time together fully understood each other and things like that. So that's just another example I could think of that people might be familiar with is from those movies. But yeah, intimacy is just this intimacy with God is like I said, it's the same concept as intimacy that we understand in all relationships. It's just with God, him looking into us and us also looking into him and having that close union when we come together.
Those are some really awesome examples, because I don't know why it never really like clicked with me. Like when you mentioned, Band of Brothers, I've talked about this all the time, but my husband's in the Army. And I remember when he came back from basic, he was very talking about battle buddies, or like the guys in his unit he's very, very close to, because it's that level of intimacy. They've seen him, like you're trusting somebody with your life. And then I think back to like, I don't really have that. And then I'm like, yes, I do. Because I have my two best girlfriends. I call them my sisters from other misters, because like we've known each other for over 20 years. Like we're in everybody's weddings. We've seen all the bad boyfriends, all the good boyfriends, births, like everything. Like we may as well be sisters for how much as we've seen. So I love that level of intimacy becomes relatable. I think that intimacy with God is sometimes kind of hard to wrap our head around, because like, battle buddies or, best friends, they're physical. Like we can see them, we can touch them, we can pick up the phone and call them if we need to. And God is like, he's everywhere and he's nowhere at the same time. We know his presence is in the Eucharist, even though it's mysterious, it's much more palpable. Like we see something, we feel something, and it makes sense to us physically. But once we leave Mass, it's hard to feel like the Holy Spirit is actually walking with us. But if you ask a child, like I was asking my kids after Mass yesterday, where is God? They just know. Like my middle son is like, he's making his first communion this year, and he's so excited. He's like, I finally get to meet God in this way. They just know that he's everywhere. And how can we get back to that childlike wonder, that steadfast knowing that he is with us all the time, just like our spouse or our battle buddy or our best friend?
Well, a relationship is something that grows over time. So you talk about your best friends, the girls that you've been friends with. Well, you guys are this close because you've been friends forever, right? Like for a long time. And the same with your husband in the military. Like he became so close with them because of all of that time that he spent with them going through basic training, which is no walk in the park. So they suffered together. They grew. I have a cousin who was in the Navy for quite a while. And that's the thing there's a lot of things about the Navy he didn't like, but the thing that he loved and that he still holds on to is the relationships that he built there. And that's because they built those relationships and they went through things together and they spent time with each other. So the surface answer is like, you're not going to enter into a deeply intimate relationship with God just by like saying, all right, well, after I turn this podcast off, I'll sit quietly with the Lord. Like it's not just going to click for you. Now, God, he's there. He doesn't have any trouble connecting with us. We have trouble. So, but when it comes to relating it to children, they get it because they don't have all of the woundedness, taintedness, they're not as messed up as we get as grown-ups surviving in this world. So they're innocent. Innocent is the right word. So they have a level of innocence that makes them more open to God. That's why I'm glad that kids do First Holy Communion in second grade, because like you said, they have a much easier time being open to the reality of this mystery and amazing thing that is the Eucharist, whereas as adults, we can struggle with that. But that's just like I said, we've been affected and tainted by the world, and things get in the way. So we can read things like, I mean, one of the most beautiful spiritualities that we can get into, especially when we're starting out talking about children, is Saint Therese of Lisieux, her little way, the little flower. And her biggest part of that is being like a child, fully reliant on God. You know, your children are fully reliant on you. Do they express it right all the time? No. But like, they are fully reliant on you. And even though at times they may be frustrated with that, they know it, especially young little kids. You know, like most little babies don't have a lot of worries because they know that mom's going to be there or dad's going to be there. And that's why when those relationships are damaged, it can be so damaging for the children. But they're just fully relying on the people that they know they can trust to take care of them. And that's what we're missing with God. And that intimacy is fully knowing and trusting him. But that, like I said, is something that we have to work towards. Using the word work is a little bit challenging because we can't like work super hard and it'll definitely work out, but it's the best word I got. But we work towards that in our prayer lives. We work towards that in encountering God and making time for that relationship and building and growing that relationship and dealing with all of the things that come up in the process of that. Because when we dive into that, like if people listen to this podcast or if you've read an inspiring book or heard an inspiring homily and you feel like now you are called to like take this spirituality thing seriously, like you're going to have to deal with stuff. You're going to run into sort of spiritual roadblocks. It can be our psychological stuff that's in the way or practical things that are in the way. A lot of times people say, well, I read these books about how to pray and have this. I just don't have time to pray. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. Well, you have to make the time, you know, you have to. And in reality is most of us aren't. I've never encountered a single person who is actually too busy to pray. They think they are. And maybe they are, but there are things they can change. They just we don't want to, or we think we can't. So we have to encounter all of those things and deal with them. But it all just starts by simply making that commitment to spending that time with God, to spending that time just being with him, focusing on him. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Like I could fill my truck up with books that could help you understand this. There's no shortage of reading material and podcasts and things. But the simple solution is if you want to spend more time with God, you just have to stop what you're doing and be with him. Because he's everywhere. He's in all things, in everything, everywhere. You can go to an adoration chapel. That's beautiful, but not everybody has one near them. Mass is obviously this beautiful place, but I can have a deeply intimate experience with God sitting right here in my office chair. If I choose to sit here, turn off the technology, set aside the things that are distracting me, set the mood, if you will, you know, light a candle, whatever might help. Just light some incense. I don't know, you know, whatever helps you focus and just be there. But like I said, don't expect that the first time you sit down to encounter God in that way, you're going to like have some deep ethereal moment. And you're going to float off your chair and biolocate or something. Like it's not how it works. Like it's going to be difficult. It's going to be awkward. But think about your first date with somebody. It was kind of awkward. You were kind of nervous. Maybe you said something you wish you didn't say. You weren't sure how it went. Is he going to call me back? Is she going to, you know, like, again, like it can, I'm making a joke here a little bit, but again, we can feel that way. Like, did I do prayer right? Well, did you try? Then you did it right. Did you sit still quietly? You know, things like that. So, and there are more concrete steps that I think we can get into. But in general, it's not really meant to be that complicated. Having an intimate relationship with God just requires you to grow in your relationship with him. And we do that through our prayer life, which we, at some point, step one, I don't say find the time, make the time for it, no matter what you have to do, because this intimate relationship with God is also paramount to the salvation of our soul as well. So was something that we have to, as a Catholic culture and society, we really need to start taking much more seriously and being willing to make the sacrifices we have to make to not only prioritize that for ourselves, but also for our families.
I love that bringing it back to like a physical relationship, not necessarily physical in the sense of how most people think of physical relationships, but like you're right. On a first date, it might feel weird the first time. So sitting down to pray might feel weird the first time because we're not like with a group of people reciting it at the same time. But as long as you're making the effort, just like with any relationship, like, my husband and I have been married. This year will be 14 years. And there have been good years. There have been bad years. There have been stagnant years, right? So let's talk about what to do when you run into an obstacle in your relationship with God. Like maybe you're having trouble getting started, or maybe you feel like we've talked about periods of dryness in the relationship. How do we overcome these obstacles when it comes to creating an intimate relationship with God?
Well, in the spiritual life, you're going to run into all sorts of things that can get in the way of your connection with God. It can be a pattern of sin. It can be distractions. It can be, any number of things. And that's one of the benefits, in my experience, of sitting down for silent prayer with God, is that the biggest thing that people struggle with when they try to sit with God silently is the thoughts in their brains get in the way. And typically those thoughts are usually the things that in those moments are the most important to us, whether good or bad. It's the things that we're worried about, stressed about, excited about, whatever it is. It's like things that are penetrating. And there's the devil and there's spiritual warfare elements that can get in the way as well. But one of the biggest advantages is sitting silently with God will highlight those things that we need to figure out, that we need to work out. Okay. A lot of us, we just went through the holidays. A lot of people struggle with the holidays because of like family relationships and things that are difficult that can stress us out. Maybe you had a negative interaction with somebody that you don't get along with in your family, or you're frustrated. Like, those are the kind of things that when you sit quietly are going to come into your brain. And all of a sudden you've spent 5 minutes fake arguing with somebody in your head. But again, that tells you what you need to then pray about, what you need to ask God to help you with, what you need to work out. The other obstacles we run into are things like sometimes people can struggle with intimacy with God because they struggle with intimacy in general. And there could be lots of reasons for that. You encounter people who struggle with looking at God as a loving father because maybe they didn't have a loving father. We can struggle with intimacy because maybe we've been wounded somehow intimately in our lives, and that could make that very hard for people to just embrace intimacy in any way. But again, that is the beauty of coming to God in prayer like this, is because if we really open ourselves up, He will show us those things. He'll show us the wounds. He'll show us, when you enter into this type of prayer, this intimate, quiet, silent prayer with God, if you're struggling with a pattern of sin, you're going to know it, because it gets in the way. Whether it's a mortal sin or a lot of venial sins, like all of those things get in the way of our relationship with God. And when we sit quietly with Him, all that stuff is going to come to light. But then we have to deal with it. And that depends on what the situation is. I've talked about before about how we have our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual health, and they all play a very important role in our lives, and they affect each other. So sometimes people who struggle with intimacy and with God as a father or loving because of, things that happened to them in their childhood or their lives, that's just another reason why they need to deal with that. They may need some help with therapy or continued therapy, or people who, like I said, it depends on the situation, but that's the beauty of this prayer, of this way of encountering God, is it highlights those things. At the very least, it tells you, people ask, well, I don't know what to pray about. Well, pray about whatever it is that is getting in the way of your ability to pray, to be focused and centered on God. Those are the things that you want to pray about. And those obstacles that you encounter, God will help you with. Again, it's very vague answers I'm giving here. And again, we could talk about spiritual direction, that's also when that comes in here as well. But at the very least, praying like this will highlight those areas that you need to work on, or that you need to pray about, that you need to address, the things that are getting in your way of being with God in those moments. I hope that answers the question. I kind of bounced around there a little bit, but it's kind of...
No, I think it does. I think because silence is like, we're not, especially nowadays, we're not used to silence. We're used to having a screen in our face, or doing something, going somewhere. Just, there's a lot of noise. And I personally have noticed that if I'm ever quiet, like, my head is very noisy. I'm always thinking about the next thing, I got to add this to the grocery list, or I got to make sure that I pick the kids up at this time this day, and blah, blah, blah. And those are the things that we should be talking to God about. Those are the things that we should take to him and say, hey, this is something that's in my way. How do we get this? How do we get this out of the way, kind of thing? And I think that that's really important. It is a practice to sit down and practice being silent, being quiet, just listening, because you can't really hear him if you're doing all the talking.
Absolutely. Well, God's language, I may have said this before, but God's language is silence.
We've unfortunately run out of time, but if you'd like to hear the rest of this episode, you can listen to us anytime on Spotify under Candid Catholic Convos, or you can download this episode from our website at hbgdiocese.org. Thank you so much for listening. Our goal at the Diocese of Harrisburg is to walk with you on your faith journey. So if this episode resonated with you in any way, the easiest way to show your appreciation is by sharing this program with your network, or by leaving a review on your listening platform. You can also support us financially by making a donation online at hbgdiocese.org/DAC and clicking the Make a Donation button. Thanks again, and we'll see you at church on Sunday.